Good morning. It's Wednesday, and I'm getting started a little bit later than normal. We are going to go through quite a bit of these notes today. Don't forget that you do have an assignment. You're grading those DBQs. I think I explained it very well, but let me know if you don't. Please make sure you read the directions. You're highlighting things and you're grading, giving it a score at the end. All right. So we ended up yesterday at one of my favorite things. I think I said the Kellogg-Briand Pact that outlawed war, which I just find so awesome. That probably scared you. Sorry. Um, Again, it's not going to work, obviously, because we have another gigantic global war very shortly after this. But we tried, right? We tried. So we have an election of 1820, we have an election of 1928. Herbert Hoover is going to run against, and this again is a time that you need to know the candidate of the opposite party. Very seldom do you need to know who the other person was. We don't really talk about that except way back in the corrupt bargain when Andrew Jackson loses. We don't usually ever talk about who the other party was. In this case, we need to know who the other party was. This will be an important factor in the developing 1920s, 1930s. So at the bottom of the page, Herbert Hoover is the Republican nominee, and Alfred E. Smith is the Democratic nominee. And the reason we need to know this is one particular reason. Alfred Smith is Catholic. And this comes across very negatively across the country. It is one of the reasons that Herbert Hoover wins. There'll be a lot of Democrats that will jump the ticket and vote for Herbert Hoover. It's also the campaign 1928 that radio is going to be used. So both of these men will use radio. They'll speak on the radio. Herbert Hoover will defend his the role that he played in the Philippines and all of that other stuff. At the top of page 10, religious bigotry. That will be the key part of this campaign, using all of those things. And at the top of page 10, a vote for Al Smith is a vote for the Pope. And again, should not be lost on you that the largest population, religious population in the United States is Catholic. And it takes us until 1960 to elect a Catholic president. You can see, if you look in your notes, just how large that margin was electorally, 444 to 87. That is a landslide, an overwhelming. Hoover was the first Republican in 52 years to carry Confederate states, which means those Southerners jumped party ticket and voted for a Republican rather than to vote for a Democrat. I'll also tell you, just because y'all love my granny stories, my granny has a brother named Herbert Hoover. His name is Herbert Hoover Hines. And Herbert Hoover was a really important person in this time period. He's soon to lose that. But for many Americans, he was the epitome of all things. He was a businessman. I think I'm jerking the camera so much. So, huge Republican majority, returned to the House of Representatives. So again, this continued role that the Republican Party has during the 1920s. Hoover's presidency. So things are starting to go bad. Things are already bad economically in Europe. So one of the things that Hoover does is organize food drives for starving people in Belgium. His leadership in the Food Administration during World War I earned him the title of the Great Engineer, the Wonder Boy. He was really seen as the organizer of all the home front stuff during World War I. As Secretary of Commerce, he supported some progressive ideas like labor unions and federal regulations of radio. And in 1928, again, you have to be careful what you say about public things. He says, poverty will be banished from our nation, and everybody ought to be rich. 1928. When you say stuff like that, sometimes karma just has to come back, right? She just has to have the last laugh. And in 1929, the great stock market crash. Karma's over here listening to be rich, be rich. I don't think so. So, what happens that leads up to the crash? So, the crash is understandable, but again, I like a bubble. And many economists like bubbles as well because it's easy to understand. The bubble is fragile. The bubble can get bigger. Sometimes, if you think about, again, the simplest analogy, chewing bubble gum, sometimes your bubble is big and it stays big and you can hold it and oh my gosh, it's so big, and then it fades back down. Sometimes you blow small little bubbles, boom, pop. Sometimes you blow big bubbles and they pop all over your face. That is the stock market. And the trick to the stock market, again, is to know what those bubbles are, when to move your money. That's why rich people stay rich, and people that aren't familiar with the stock market have difficulty. So, what happens in the 1920s is this rise of business and middle class people understanding in order to achieve wealth, they need to invest in all these new markets. And so they continue to invest. And middle class people are getting rich, not Vanderbilt rich, but rich to them. So, what happens with stocks is you get paid dividends. So, I purchase 10 shares of Disney, and then on the end of their fiscal year, they pay out dividends. So, I bought the stock at $10, it's now worth $12. They pay me those $2. Well, what stock market brokers encourage you to do is not to take the $2, it's to buy more stock, to use your dividends to buy more stock. They also encourage you to borrow against future dividends. So, right, Disney paid me $2 this year. The likelihood that they'll pay me $3 next year is even higher. So, let's borrow on the margin. So, money is not really changing hands. Real money is not really changing hands. It's kind of like you're borrowing a loan on future gains. And all of that works well if Disney stock continues to increase. And for about 8 years, that's what happened. Everybody was buying on the margin. Um, the stockbrokers were making tremendous amounts of money on their commissions because that's how they make money, by how many shares they sell of something. And regular middle class people weren't really clear of how that all worked, because at some point you have to call the margin, right? You're going to have to pay up all that money that you borrowed for your future shares. So, what we understand is, add a little science. Ooh, I got to pause. Hold on. My phone is ringing. Okay, I'm back. Thank goodness for the pause there. Okay, so that's what's happening. And as this escalates, and for future reference, you should always know that there's always going to be a crash. And it just is, how do you protect yourself from the crash? This crash occurred at the same time farming is going down, Europe can't rebuild. So this was like that proverbial perfect storm. Too many economic crises at the same time. So when we talk about the Great Depression, the straw that breaks the camel's back is the stock market crash. But it isn't just that. So I talked about on the margin, investors purchase stocks from stockbrokers for as little as 5% down because you're going to make money. And when the values rise, they keep buying and getting more and more into debt. And then what happens is people start calling the margin. And when they call the margin, you can't pay it back. It would be very much like, again, like I used yesterday, those of you that are paying a banknote on your car, that if the bank called and said, hey, we need you to pay all that money today. Very few people can do that. That's why you have a loan. And that's what happened at this point in time with the stock market crash. So you bought stock and you only put 5% down, as a stockbroker, I now got to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need that 95%. I don't have that 95%. And so that what is the house of cards that comes crashing down. Now, again, what causes that is our key buzzword at the bottom of the page: over speculation. Investors gambled that prices would continue to rise. There is always a point where it doesn't. There is always a point where a stock or a business continues to kind of just flatline their profits. Artificial rises in stock and commodities fueled speculation. Everybody's getting rich in the stock market. Everybody's getting rich. And that speculation, again, is what causes that to happen. So on the top of page 11, the great crash, October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday, everybody starts selling. So when you start selling, you're already on a margin. You already have only put 5% down, and you owe 95% of the stock at the time that you purchased it. Now everyone's trying to sell to get out of the market, and that goes down. The price that you bought it at doesn't go down. So if I bought the stock was $1 at the time, and I only put down 5 cents, I owe 95 cents on that stock. Well, now everybody's selling that stock, and now that stock is only worth 15 cents. So not only am I out the 95 cents, but then the value of that has decreased as well. So it is an overwhelming spectacle. Just FYI, one of the things that Wall Street has done now is put stoppers on that. So when things start selling off too quickly, bing, they put a stopper on it. This was brought up in media with the GameStop thing, right? When GameStop was doing all that, there was a stopper put, like, ooh, something is happening with this stock that we don't understand. And Wall Street will just say, stop, no more trading on that stock, as a fail-safe to prevent another crash. So by mid-November, $25 billion disappeared. It's gone. Fortunes wiped out overnight. 1932, the Dow Jones is at 41. So if you go back on the other page, in 1929, in September, it was 381. And now it's 41. So, again, traditional historical interpretation puts the crash as the immediate cause. And I want you to know the idea of immediate cause is the psychology of that. There were so many economic things happening, and it just all happened at the same time. Mostly, again, because of this 10 years of the government operating like a business. And again, the government is not a business. It's not a business. It's not in the market. It's not there to make money. That's the issue. So our long-term causes, again, are weak industries. Cotton industry was affected by synthetics, right? So in the 1920s and in the 1910s, we get synthetic materials. We get polyester. We get all these things that we can now make in a factory instead of growing it. And so there's this huge shift to these new materials. We don't have to grow. We have an unlimited supply. Railroad industry is going to be affected by the automobile, right? Now we certainly don't see a change in the way goods move across, but we see a change in the way people move across the country. Low food prices. Food prices are at all-time lows, which again is awesome if you're a consumer. It's horrible if you are a farmer. And government does not step in. Hands-off, laissez-faire, that again is the 1920s Republican business model government. Hands off, don't touch it. So on page 11, overproduction of goods by manufacturers. That's again that overspeculation. We sold 20 toasters last week. Let's make 40 toasters. But at a point, you sold toasters to everybody that wants to buy toasters, and you still keep making toasters. That's a problem. And that is where in the 1930s and 40s, we begin specializing fields of production, so means of production, so that we create a whole engineering model out of understanding production efficiency. So consumers began to spend less. I don't need another toaster. And in 1920, toasters are made to last forever and ever and ever. Um, Warehouses are going to be full of products that they can't sell. And so those people will lose money. So, what will start to happen at our toaster company when we're not selling toasters, we don't need as many people to make them. So, as a toaster factory, I have to start laying off people. So, that's round one. I'm not selling as many toasters. I got to cut back on making toasters. And when I do that, I lay off people. In 1920, when you lose your job, there's not workman's comp. We have an uneven distribution of income. A whole lot of people have a whole lot of money, and a whole lot of people don't have, sorry, a whole lot of people don't have a whole lot of money. A little teeny bit of people have a giant amount of money. Our banking system is still unstable. There's no regulations on any of those. Our economy globally is weak. Turning the page. And so on the top of page 12, we fall into what is known as the Great Depression. And what I want you to understand is this is a global Great Depression. It isn't just something that happens in the United States. It's happening around the world, which makes it difficult and hard to fix and last 10 years. It's bad. 22% of all the banks are going to fail. They'll just be gone. And again, those of you that have really older relatives, I don't think that you probably have any relatives that lived through the Great Depression that are still alive. If they are really, really old. But you might have heard stories about cleaning out great grandpa Jerry's house, or when they cleaned out your great grandparents' house, there was money hid everywhere. My grandparents had money hid everywhere. My granny and papa used a bank, but they certainly didn't put all of their money in a bank. And this was part of their reason why. Thousands of businesses are going to fail. Unemployment, we talked about that yesterday. Unemployment by 1932 is going to be 25% of our population, 13 million people. And there is no unemployment insurance. There's no help in any way. That 13 million does not include farmers. Almost all farmers are going to be put into that place. It will be as high as 33%. In Chicago, the city of Chicago, 50%. Half of the people in Chicago were unemployed. Low-skilled workers obviously are the ones that will be most affected because they're the ones building things in factories or doing manual labor or working in hotels. And if there's no one staying there, those people, again, get laid off. Total wages will drop. By 1932, 25% of farmers will lose their farm, lose their family farms, and that will never, ever recoup itself back. People experienced a horrific sense of loss of their self-worth. It's a depression economically, and it's a depression mentally for many people, men especially who can't take care of their families. And many men will just leave, will just walk off and leave their wives and children with the thought that charities would look after uh, abandoned wives and children, but it becomes harder to get charity if there's a man in the house that could work, even though you can't find it. Families break up, marriages and birth rates will decline, families will double up in houses. 2 or 3 million people become hobos. So again, that's a word that we don't use anymore. We used to use tramps as well. Now, sadly, we still have this. We call them homeless people, but these people will just move around. And this word Hoovervilles is a really important word. They're named for Herbert Hoover because the people feel that Herbert Hoover does nothing to help them. Now, in all actuality, there's not a lot he really could have done, right? Really he was the leader of the country and should have led, but really Congress should have been reacting much more quickly to many of these economic instances, and they don't do anything. Malnutrition, people can't eat. They can't afford food. Farmers can't grow food, and we are in a bad bind. And it is always a disaster in a country that can't feed its people. So depression, longest and most devastating in U.S. history. And I hope as long as I'm teaching, I never have to change that because this time period is horrible. It has bright spots because this 10 years will really bring us into a more modern world that tries its best to prevent this from ever happening again. The United States is going to get hit hardest among industrial nations. U.S. exports drop, and it will further hurt our economy. The bottom of the page, Hoover's response to the Great Depression is not much. He believes that outside forces were responsible. It's not our fault, it's someone else's fault. And that might make people feel better, but it certainly doesn't help. Post-war military alliances were building more armament, inflationary public works, unbalanced budgets. And at the top of page 13, whatever he did, it was too late. He waited too long. And by the time his presidency recognized the problem, it was too late. Farming, pre-market crash. The Agricultural Marketing Act was passed in 1929, designed to help farmers help themselves through co-ops. And again, it's a little too late. Federal Farm Bureau is established in 1930, so it takes 10 more years to do that. That will give out $500 million, lent money to buy, sell, and store agricultural surpluses. And again, in 1930, the Harley-Schmid tariff in 1930, again, is the highest peace tariff, and again, established in 1930, with the idea of helping, and it doesn't. Here's our attempts. Volunteerism. Hoosier says people should volunteer and we can get over this. Again, not going to happen. Urge businesses to avoid layoffs. How can I do that if I'm not selling products? How can I pay my employees if I'm not selling the product that I'm making? That's almost impossible. Secured no strike pledges from labor unions. That did happen. Urge all citizens to contribute to charities. Again, that's hard if I don't have money myself. Private charities cannot do this. There's just no way. In 1930, Congress appropriated $750 million for public buildings. So this public works will be one of the things that will spur the economy. And those of you that pay attention to our current events, that's one of the things that President Biden and his administration is currently working on. The same kind of thing, a giant infrastructure package for the United States. And when we do those things, it creates jobs. And this is what in 1930 Congress does as well. Public buildings, river, we're going to build all kinds of buildings. I would guarantee that there are buildings in and around Sullivan County, in Terre Haute, in Indiana, that are built by this public works. Hoover Dam begins in 1930. And at the top of page 14, Reconstruction Finance Corporation, again created in 1932, $500 million to borrow $1.5 billion. And again, this is in 1932 dollars. So $1.5 billion is a lot in 2021. It was a heck of a lot in 1932. On the bottom of page 14 is something that's really important. You need to draw a big box around the bottom of page 14, the bonus army. So one of the things that happened during World War I to get men to enlist and volunteer was they were promised a bonus in 1945. When they would have probably been like 50 at that point, right? Because they went in, let's just say in 1920, they're 20 years old. Yeah. So they would have been in their late 40s. The government said, in reward for your participation in World War I, in 1945, we're going to pay you this bonus for as a veteran of World War I. So 14,000 unemployed veterans marched to Washington in 1932 to say, hey, give us our money now. I need that money now. I can't wait till 1945. So what's the difference between now and 1945? Well, the big difference is the government didn't have the money. At Hoover's insistence, the Senate did not pass the bonus bill, and about half of the bonus army accepted congressional transportation home. So Hoover said, no, don't pay them. Do not pay them. And we're not going to pay you, but we'll give you a bus ticket home. Half of the people accepted the bus ticket home. The other half said, no, we're not leaving. We're not leaving this place until you give us our money, because I don't have a reason to go back home. I don't have a job. I can't feed my family. I did what my country asked of me. Now you need to help me. And so these remaining 5,000 are going to build what's called shanties or Hoovervilles. They're going to build their cardboard houses in view of the White House. And Hoover's going to make a really bad mistake. He's going to call out the Army, the United States Army, on veterans, in which 2 of them are going to be killed, babies are going to be hurt, women are going to be hurt, and this forever and ever, no matter when we go through all this legacy of Hoover, this is what Hoover is remembered for, that he called out the United States Army on veterans who wanted just their money 10 years early. Hoover appeared heartless, and this is what keeps him from becoming a second-term president. So, assessment of Hoover. Despite not doing enough, Hoover does do stuff. But again, all of this is overshadowed by what happens in 1932. Foreign policy, Japan. Remember, we had this thing that outlaws war. Japan is attacking everybody. They're attacking Manchuria. They violate the League of Nations. They leave the League of Nations. They try to isolate. So when we get to 1941, and many people believe, oh, wow, this was a surprise. Japan started this in 1931, and the United States is pushing back, and we've already made an enemy of Japan in 1931. So, Japan aggression seen by many historians at the beginning of the road to World War II, not Germany's aggression, Japan. Improved relations with Latin America, again, trying to make good friends with Latin America. All right, so we'll end there now. Tomorrow we'll fly through this American society. There's not a whole lot that's on the exam about that. Please don't forget to do your assignment, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.